October 14, 1944. Tinian Island, Mariana Islands. Dawn crept across the Pacific horizon as Petty Officer Hiroshi Tanaka huddled in a makeshift shelter, clutching his emperor's portrait to his chest. The son of a respected Tokyo University professor, he believed with absolute certainty that his captors, these American devils, would torture and execute him before nightfall. Little did he know that his interrogation would shatter not just his expectations, but the very foundations of the imperial worldview he had been raised to defend. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the tale of how a specialized unit of Black American Marines, armed with perfect Japanese language skills and cultural understanding, didn't just extract critical intelligence from POWs. They inadvertently delivered the most devastating psychological blow to the Emperor's most devoted servants, the gift of seeing themselves through entirely unexpected eyes. Tanaka's journey had begun months earlier, in the burning wreckage of a naval vessel off the coast of Saipan. The pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy, the destroyer Yuki Kazi, had been reduced to a floating inferno after an encounter with American aircraft. Tanaka, a communications officer trained at the elite naval academy in Itajima, had been blown overboard by an explosion that killed 17 of his comrades instantly. For 6 hours, he clung to a piece of debris, watching as the imperial flag slowly sank beneath the waves. Better to die with honor than face the shame of capture, his commander had instructed during training. The naval code was clear. Surrender was unthinkable. Yet when American sailors from the USS Nicholas pulled him from the water, his body had betrayed his spirit's willingness to die. His training had failed him, or perhaps some deeper human instinct for survival had prevailed. Lieutenant Raymond Mitsuo Akagi watched through the observation window as the latest prisoner was brought into the processing center on Tinian. A graduate of the University of California with a degree in linguistics, Akagi had been teaching at a high school in San Francisco when Pearl Harbor changed everything. Despite his family being forced into Manzanar internment camp, Akagi had volunteered for service, determined to prove his loyalty to America. "What do we have here?" asked Staff Sergeant Marcus Williams, a towering figure from Howard University, who had studied Japanese language and culture for 3 years as part of a special academic exchange program before the war. "Communications officer, according to his insignia," Akagi replied, examining the bedraggled prisoner through the one-way glass. "Looks educated. Might actually know something useful." Williams nodded, making notes on his clipboard. "I'll take the lead on this one. Been working on that Kyoto dialect you showed me." The specialized military intelligence unit they served in, officially designated as the 3rd Joint Intelligence Processing Unit, but informally known as the Shadow Talkers, was one of the most closely guarded secrets of the Pacific War. Comprised primarily of Nisei Japanese Americans and a small contingent of black servicemen who had studied in Japan before the war, the unit represented an intelligence capability the Japanese High Command never anticipated. The unit's existence was the result of a prescient decision made years before Pearl Harbor. In 1936, the Office of Naval Intelligence had quietly begun sponsoring exceptional American students to study in Japan, recognizing that cultural and linguistic expertise would be invaluable in any future conflict. Among those selected were a dozen black college students whose presence in Japan would attract less suspicion than white Americans during an era of increasing tensions. For Marcus Williams, the journey to becoming a Japanese linguistic specialist had begun at Howard University, where his aptitude for languages had caught the attention of his professors. The son of a Baptist minister from Georgia, Williams had grown up surrounded by biblical Hebrew and Greek texts in his father's study. Languages came naturally to him, and when offered the chance to study abroad in Japan, he leaped at the opportunity. From 1937 to 1939, Williams had lived with a host family in Kyoto, studying at the Imperial University. His host father, Professor Tanaka Hideki, had welcomed him warmly, intrigued by this articulate young American with dark skin. The professor's son, Hiroshi, had been a standout Naval Academy student, often home on holidays. The two young men had spent many evenings discussing literature, philosophy, and their respective cultures, forming an unlikely friendship that transcended the growing political tensions between their nations. Now, 5 years later, Williams stared through the glass at the emaciated prisoner, recognition dawning slowly. The immaculate naval cadet was barely recognizable in this hollow-eyed captive, but there was no mistake. Fate had delivered Hiroshi Tanaka, the son of his Japanese host family, into his hands for interrogation. "I know him," Williams said quietly. Akagi looked up sharply. "What do you mean you know him?" "I lived with his family in Kyoto, before the war. He's Professor Tanaka's son." Akagi whistled low. "Well, that complicates things." "Or simplifies them," Williams replied, his mind racing through the possibilities this connection presented. "Let me go in alone first. No translation assistance, no recording, just 5 minutes." Captain James Harrison, the unit commander, had been listening quietly from the doorway. A career intelligence officer with a reputation for unorthodox methods, Harrison understood the potential value of personal connections in interrogation. 5 minutes, Sergeant. No promises beyond that." Williams nodded, straightening his uniform before entering the interrogation room. The small Spartan space contained only a metal table, 2 chairs, and a jug of water with cups. Standard procedure dictated that Japanese prisoners be treated with unexpected kindness, a psychological tactic that often disoriented men who had been told Americans would torture them, but Williams knew this case would require something more nuanced. Tanaka sat rigidly in the metal chair, eyes fixed on the table, preparing himself for the brutality he had been assured would come. When the door opened, he didn't look up, maintaining what dignity he could muster in captivity. He heard the scrape of the chair opposite him but continued staring downward. "Tanaka-san," Williams said softly in perfect Kyoto-accented Japanese. "It has been a long time since we shared green tea in your father's garden." The prisoner's head snapped up, eyes widening in shock as he took in the black American Marine sitting across from him. For a moment, confusion clouded his features before recognition dawned. "Williams-san?" he whispered, his voice hoarse from smoke inhalation and days without proper hydration. "Marcus Williams?" Williams nodded, pouring water into a cup and sliding it across the table. "Drink. Your throat sounds painful." Automatically, Tanaka reached for the cup, his training momentarily forgotten in the shock of encountering his former friend. He drank deeply before setting the cup down, his hands trembling slightly. "You speak Japanese now as well as you did then," Tanaka said, slipping unconsciously into the familiar pattern of their old conversations, perhaps even better. "I had good teachers," Williams replied with a small smile. "Your father among them." At the mention of his father, Tanaka's expression hardened. "Why are you here? To use our friendship to extract information?" "I will tell you nothing." Williams leaned forward. "I'm here because this is war and we both serve our countries, but I'm also here because seeing a familiar face might make this easier for both of us." Behind the observation glass, Harrison and Akagi watched the exchange with growing interest. "What's he saying?" Harrison asked. Akagi listened intently. "They know each other from before the war. Williams lived with his family in Kyoto. They're reminiscing, it seems." "Reminiscing?" Harrison raised an eyebrow. "This isn't a reunion party, Lieutenant." "No, sir, but Williams is building rapport. It's textbook interrogation technique, just with a very unusual foundation." Inside the interrogation room, the conversation continued in fluent Japanese, each man measuring the other across years of separation and the vast divide of war. "They told us Americans would torture Japanese prisoners," Tanaka said finally. "That you were savages who delighted in cruelty." "And what do you think now?" Williams asked. Tanaka looked around the sparse but clean room, at the water he'd been provided, at the absence of any instruments of torture. "I think there is much we were not told." "That's a start," Williams replied. "There's a lot I could tell you about this war that might surprise you, Tanaka-san. And there are things you could tell me that might help end it sooner, with fewer deaths on both sides." Tanaka's expression closed. "I cannot betray my emperor." "I'm not asking you to," Williams said gently. "But consider this. Would your emperor want more Japanese sons to die unnecessarily? Would your father? The mention of Professor Tanaka again struck a chord. Hiroshi looked away, conflict evident in his posture. My father. Is he safe? Tokyo has been bombed. I don't know, Williams answered honestly, but I can try to find out for you. A knock at the door signaled the end of Williams' 5 minutes. He stood, bowing slightly in the Japanese fashion. Rest, drink water, we'll talk again soon. As Williams exited, Harrison was waiting in the hallway, arms crossed. Well, what's your assessment? He's conflicted, sir. Naval Academy training, elite family background, all the imperial indoctrination you'd expect. But he's also educated enough to process new information when it contradicts his preconceptions. Can you break him? Williams winced slightly at the phrasing. I don't think of it as breaking him, sir. More like opening a door he didn't know existed. Harrison studied the sergeant thoughtfully. All right, he's yours to handle, but I want results. The Tinian Air Base construction is behind schedule, and intelligence believes the Japanese are planning a counteroffensive. We need whatever he knows about their naval movements. Yes, sir, but I'd like to bring Corporal Davis in with me next time. Davis. Why? Tanaka's been conditioned to expect certain things from Americans, white Americans specifically. Seeing black Americans speaking perfect Japanese, it creates cognitive dissonance. The more we can shake his worldview, the more receptive he'll be to questioning other beliefs. Harrison considered this. Psychological warfare at the individual level. Interesting approach, Sergeant. You have 48 hours to produce something useful. As Williams walked away, Lieutenant Akagi fell in step beside him. You really think you can turn him? I'm not trying to turn him, Ray. Just trying to get him to see reality as it is, not as he's been taught to see it. There's no difference in war, Akagi replied grimly. Reality is whatever helps your side win. Williams glanced at his Nisei colleague, understanding the complex loyalties that tore at him daily. Maybe, but I think truth has its own power, regardless of which side wields it. The next morning, Williams and Corporal James Davis prepared for their interrogation session. Davis, a former linguistics student from Morehouse College, had spent 2 years studying at Waseda University in Tokyo. His Japanese was flawless, with the distinct intonation patterns of Tokyo's educated class. So this guy knew you before the war? Davis asked as they reviewed their approach. His family hosted me in Kyoto. I spent New Year's, Obon festivals, everything with them. His father treated me like another son. Davis shook his head. That's wild, man. Of all the POWs in all the camps in all the Pacific, this one walks into yours. Not just coincidence, Williams replied. The Japanese Naval Academy is small, elite. These communication officers all come from the same background, same training. If it wasn't Tanaka, it would be someone very similar. Still, Davis said, must be strange facing him across that table. Williams nodded, remembering evenings spent in Professor Tanaka's study, the old man patiently correcting his pronunciation, while Hiroshi practiced his limited English. The memory felt surreal against the backdrop of war. Let's focus on approach, Williams said, redirecting his thoughts. I want to start with naval communications protocols. They change their codes regularly, but the patterns might give our cryptographers something to work with. And if he resists? He will at first. That's where our cultural knowledge comes in. Japanese military culture values hierarchy and duty above all else, but there's a concept called giri that we can leverage. Obligation, Davis translated, exactly. By treating him with respect, providing for his needs, we create an obligation. It conflicts with his military duty, creates internal tension. Davis nodded thoughtfully, and showing him that black Americans know his language, his culture, undermines everything he's been taught about Western barbarians, Williams finished. The propaganda falls apart when faced with contradictory evidence. When they entered the interrogation room, Tanaka looked markedly better than the previous day. He had been given a chance to bathe, fresh clothes and proper meals. Military intelligence had learned early in the Pacific campaign that humane treatment yielded better results than the torture Japanese soldiers were warned to expect. Tanaka stood and bowed slightly as Williams entered, a reflexive courtesy that revealed his upbringing. When Corporal Davis followed, speaking a formal Japanese greeting, Tanaka's composure slipped momentarily, surprise registering in his eyes. "Tanaka-san, this is my colleague Corporal Davis," Williams introduced in Japanese. "He studied at Waseda University." "Hajime mashite," Davis said, bowing precisely the way a Tokyo University graduate would. "I hope you are finding the accommodations acceptable." Tanaka hesitated before responding with ingrained politeness. "The food is adequate, thank you." The three men sat, and Williams placed a photograph on the table, a black and white image of himself, standing with the Tanaka family in front of a Kyoto shrine, cherry blossoms in full bloom. Hiroshi, younger and in civilian clothes, stood smiling beside him. "Your mother gave me this before I left Japan," Williams explained. "She insisted I take it to remember my time with your family." Tanaka stared at the photograph, his military bearings softening almost imperceptibly. "Mother always liked you," he said quietly. "She said you appreciated the subtleties of our culture better than most Japanese students." Williams smiled. "She was too kind. I made many embarrassing mistakes. Like the time you wore indoor slippers into the garden," Tanaka recalled, the ghost of a smile crossing his face before he caught himself, remembering his situation. Davis watched this exchange with keen attention, noting the subtle shifts in Tanaka's body language. As planned, he shifted the conversation. "Tanaka-san, I was fortunate enough to attend Professor Aizawa's lectures on classical literature at Waseda. Does your father still correspond with him?" The casual question, containing specific cultural knowledge only someone who had genuinely studied in Japan would possess, visibly jarred Tanaka. He had been prepared to resist interrogation through pain, to die rather than betray his nation. He had not been prepared for a conversation about academic connections between Tokyo and Kyoto universities, conducted in perfect Japanese by two Black American servicemen. "I believe they still exchange New Year's greetings," he answered automatically. For the next hour, Williams and Davis maintained this approach, weaving between casual cultural conversation and increasingly specific questions about naval communications systems. Each time Tanaka hesitated or resisted, they would return to shared experiences, literature, or cultural references that established their authentic connection to Japan. "What I don't understand," Davis said at one point, "cares why the Imperial Navy changed the signal flags protocol in June. The previous system was more efficient, according to the naval officers we've spoken with. It was a calculated risk, implying other officers had already shared information while appealing to Tanaka's professional pride." Tanaka frowned. "Those officers were mistaken. The new system is superior because it incorporates regional variation. Each fleet uses modified protocols based on their operational area." Williams and Davis exchanged a glance, recognizing the valuable intelligence Tanaka had inadvertently confirmed. The Japanese Navy was indeed using regionally distinct signal systems, a fact that would help American codebreakers enormously. "Interesting," Williams replied casually. "That must create challenges for vessels transferred between fleets." "There is a standardization period," Tanaka explained, before catching himself. He fell silent, realizing he had shared operational details. Williams changed the subject smoothly. "Your father once showed me his collection of ukiyo-e prints. I was particularly struck by the Hiroshige landscapes." The interrogation continued in this manner, yielding small but significant pieces of intelligence, through conversation rather than confrontation. When they concluded the session 2 hours later, Tanaka appeared troubled, but not hostile, precisely the psychological state they had aimed to create. Outside the interrogation room, Captain Harrison waited for their report. "Well, what did you get?" "Confirmation of regional signal variations in the Imperial Navy," Williams reported. "Approximate timeframes for fleet communications standardization when vessels are transferred, and some technical details about their new coding machines." Harrison looked impressed. Not bad for one session with no pressure tactics. "There's more potential there," Davis added. "He's starting to question things. The fact that we know Japan, speak the language fluently, Treat him with respect. It doesn't align with what he's been told about Americans. Keep pushing that angle, Harrison instructed. I'll inform headquarters we're making progress. As Harrison walked away, Lieutenant Akagi approached, his expression troubled. You got him talking about signal protocols. That's impressive. It's just the beginning, Williams replied. Once he starts questioning one aspect of his training, others will follow. Akagi lowered his voice. Just be careful with this approach, Marcus. The psychological impact when a POW realizes they've been lied to by their own leadership, it can be devastating. Williams nodded solemnly. I know. That's why we're taking it slowly. Over the next 3 days, Williams and Davis conducted multiple interrogation sessions with Tanaka, gradually expanding their questions while maintaining the conversational approach. Each session began with cultural connections, discussions of literature, philosophy, or shared experiences in Japan, before transitioning to more military-relevant topics. By the 4th day, they were joined by a third interrogator, Private First Class Nathan Turner, a black Marine from Atlanta who had studied classical Japanese literature at Tokyo Imperial University from 1938 to 1940. Turner's specialty was the subtle cultural and philosophical underpinnings of Japanese military thought, knowledge that proved invaluable in understanding Tanaka's psychological framework. The concept of gyokusai, shattering like a jewel, is central to how officers like Tanaka view surrender, Turner explained during their preparation. They've been taught that capture is worse than death, a permanent shame. We need to reframe that narrative. During that day's session, Turner spoke with Tanaka about the ancient concept of marabito, honored guests who bring valuable knowledge from outside the community. He drew parallels between this traditional Japanese concept and Tanaka's current situation, subtly suggesting that sharing information could be viewed as an honorable act that might ultimately benefit Japan. The approach yielded results. Tanaka began to speak more openly about naval deployments, communication systems, and even the morale issues affecting Japanese forces following recent defeats in the Marianas. What he revealed painted a picture of an imperial military in deepening crisis. Supply lines stretched beyond capacity, training standards declining as experienced officers were lost, and increasing reliance on spiritual rhetoric rather than tactical reality. The combined fleet has been reorganized 3 times since June, Tanaka explained. Each reorganization has reduced our effective combat strength while official reports claim increased capability. And the sailors, do they believe the official reports? Williams asked. Tanaka hesitated. Junior sailors have no choice but to believe. Officers must maintain the appearance of belief, even when experience suggests otherwise. And what did your experience suggest? Tanaka-san, Davis asked gently. The Japanese officer stared at the table for a long moment. That we were being asked to achieve victory with inadequate resources against overwhelming industrial capacity. This candid assessment, a tacit acknowledgement of Allied superiority, represented a significant psychological shift. Tanaka was beginning to reconcile his direct experiences with the contradicting official narrative he had been taught. Meanwhile, in a separate section of the intelligence facility, other Japanese prisoners were undergoing similar transformations. Lieutenant Commander Masao Tanabe, captured after the Battle of the Philippine Sea, sat across from Technical Sergeant Elijah Freeman, another black Marine linguist whose Tokyo dialect was so precise that Tanabe had initially assumed he must be Nisei. Impossible, Tanabe had declared when told Freeman was from Detroit and had learned Japanese through academic study. No Westerner could master the linguistic subtleties you demonstrate, Freeman had smiled. Yet here we are conversing in your native tongue. Your pronunciation, your understanding of honorific levels, the cultural context behind your words, these things take a lifetime to learn. Or dedicated study and immersion, Freeman had countered. Many Americans have deep appreciation for Japanese culture and language. The same respect you might have for Bach or Beethoven, we have for Basho and No theater. This exchange highlighted a fundamental misconception that Imperial Japanese propaganda had cultivated, that Westerners, particularly Americans, were culturally unsophisticated and incapable of understanding Japan's unique civilization. The presence of black Marines speaking perfect Japanese, demonstrating intimate knowledge of literature, art, and philosophy, utterly shattered this premise. For men like Tanabe and Tanaka, this revelation was profoundly disorienting. If this one fact about American barbarism was false, what other certainties might crumble under scrutiny? As October gave way to November 1944, the intelligence gathered from these specialized interrogations proved increasingly valuable to American strategic planning. Details about Japanese naval movements helped anticipate the massive fleet action that would become the Battle of Leyte Gulf. Information about air defense protocols improved the effectiveness of B-29 bombing raids. Communications data enhanced code-breaking operations across the Pacific Theater. Yet perhaps the most significant impact was one that wouldn't be measured in tactical victories or strategic advantages. In those small interrogation rooms on Tinian, a transformation was occurring that would ultimately contribute to Japan's post-war reconciliation with defeat, the gradual realization by educated officers that the imperial narrative was fundamentally flawed. For Hiroshi Tanaka, this transformation accelerated after his 6th interrogation session, when Williams shared news that American intelligence had confirmed his family's safety in Kyoto. The city had been largely spared from bombing due to its cultural significance, and Professor Tanaka continued teaching, though under increasingly difficult circumstances. "Your father was briefly detained for questioning about his pre-war American connections," Williams explained, "but he was released after university colleagues vouched for his loyalty." Tanaka's relief was palpable. "Thank you for this information." "There's something else," Williams added, sliding a small package across the table. "We intercepted mail destined for Japanese military posts. This was addressed to your naval base in Saipan." The package contained letters from Tanaka's mother and sister, written months earlier, but never delivered due to the American invasion of Saipan. Though the military censors had reviewed the contents, the letters had been resealed out of respect for privacy. Tanaka's hands trembled slightly as he accepted this unexpected connection to home. This is most unexpected. Read them in private," Williams said, rising. "We'll continue tomorrow." That evening, alone in his secure quarters, Tanaka read his family's words by the dim light of a military-issue lamp. His mother wrote of daily life in Kyoto, the increasing scarcity of basic goods, and her prayers for his safety. His sister, now working in a munitions factory, described the strain of 18-hour shifts and the declining health of workers exposed to harsh chemicals. Between the lines of encouragement and family news, Tanaka could read the growing hardships of civilian life in Japan, realities that contradicted the official reports of national resilience and imminent victory he had received in military briefings. When Williams returned the next morning, he found Tanaka in a contemplative mood. "My sister mentions food rationing has been reduced 3 times, he said without preamble. "Is the situation in Japan as dire as her letter suggests?" Williams considered his response carefully. "Would you like an honest answer or a comforting one? After all this time you ask if I want honesty." A hint of the old Tanaka surfaced, the confident student who had debated philosophical points late into the night. Williams nodded acknowledgement. "American strategic bombing has increasingly targeted transportation infrastructure. Food distribution is severely compromised in major cities. Rural areas fare better, but overall civilian caloric intake has dropped below sustainable levels in urban centers." Tanaka absorbed this, comparing it to his sister's carefully worded descriptions. "And the war production she mentions? Struggling. Japan's industrial capacity is approximately 1/10 of America's. For every ship you lose, we can build 10. For every aircraft, 50. These weren't exaggerations, but statistical realities that American intelligence had calculated with industrial precision. The numbers told a story that no amount of spiritual fortitude or fighting spirit could overcome. "If this is true," Tanaka said slowly, "then Japan cannot win." "No," Williams agreed quietly. "It cannot." The admission hung between them, a truth that many Japanese officers had begun to recognize privately but could never acknowledge officially. For Tanaka, speaking it aloud felt simultaneously like betrayal and relief. "What will happen to Japan?" he asked finally, "when the war is lost?" It was the first time he had engaged with the possibility of defeat as a certainty rather than a theoretical concern. Williams recognized the significance of this psychological shift. "That depends partly on how the war ends," he replied. "A negotiated surrender would look different from a fight to the last man." "The military leadership will never surrender," Tanaka said with certainty. "They would rather see Japan destroyed entirely." "And the emperor?" Tanaka looked troubled. "The emperor is advised by the military leadership." Williams noted the careful phrasing, neither criticizing the emperor directly nor fully absolving him of responsibility. Another small crack in the ideological foundation. "Tanaka-san, I want to show you something few prisoners have been allowed to see." After securing special permission from Captain Harrison, Williams escorted Tanaka, under guard but without restraints, to a hillside overlooking the massive American base being constructed on Tinian. Below them stretched an engineering marvel: multiple 500-foot runways, vast supply depots, barracks for thousands of personnel, all being built at an astonishing pace. "This will be the largest airbase in the Pacific when completed next month," Williams explained. "From here, hundreds of B-29 superfortresses will be able to reach the Japanese home islands." Tanaka stared at the scale of the operation, the endless stream of construction equipment, the precision organization that allowed such rapid progress. "How many bases like this exist?" he asked quietly. "Dozens, with more being built every month." "And the aircraft? These B-29s? America produces approximately 740 combat aircraft per month. Japan produces approximately 40. Tanaka closed his eyes briefly, the mathematical reality physically painful to consider. "In Iwo they taught us that America was weak, materially strong but spiritually vacant. That one Japanese soldier embodying Yamato Damashi was worth 10 American counterparts." Williams waited, allowing Tanaka to continue his thought process without interruption. "But Spirit does not build airfields," Tanaka said finally. "Spirit does not manufacture aircraft or ships or ammunition. I begin to think we fundamentally misunderstood what we were facing." This observation, delivered with the calm analysis of the Naval Academy graduate, represented a profound shift in perspective. It was exactly the type of cognitive realignment that the specialized interrogation approach had been designed to achieve. As December 1944 approached, the intelligence team expanded their operation, applying lessons learned from Tanaka's case to other Japanese prisoners. The approach was formalized into a methodology that combined cultural respect, linguistic expertise, and psychological insight. Black and Nisei interrogators worked in tandem, their diverse backgrounds providing multiple avenues to connect with prisoners from different Japanese social and educational backgrounds. For prisoners like Tanaka, educated officers with pre-war exposure to international perspectives, the approach yielded extraordinary results. Not only did they provide valuable tactical intelligence, but many began to assist voluntarily with broader analytical projects, offering insights into Japanese military psychology that proved invaluable in planning the war's final phases. The success of what became known as the cultural bridge approach attracted attention from the highest levels of Allied intelligence. In early December, Brigadier General Charles Willoughby, General MacArthur's intelligence chief, visited Tinian specifically to observe the program. "Remarkable work, Captain Harrison," Willoughby commented after watching recordings of several interrogation sessions. "These men are providing insights we couldn't get through conventional methods." "It's the approach, sir," Harrison explained. "By demonstrating respect for their culture, while simultaneously challenging their propaganda-based perceptions, we create a space where truth becomes possible." Willoughby nodded thoughtfully. "And your Black Marines, their language skills are truly extraordinary. Where did you find them?" "Pre-war academic exchange programs mostly. The Navy and State Department had the foresight to send scholars to Japan when relations were still cordial. Many of these men lived with Japanese families, studied at Japanese universities, and the Japanese prisoners respond well to them, despite racial differences." Harrison smiled slightly. That's part of the psychological impact, sir. Japanese propaganda depicted Americans as culturally ignorant and racially prejudiced. When they encounter black Americans speaking perfect Japanese, demonstrating deep cultural knowledge, it creates what psychologists call cognitive dissonance. Their worldview can't accommodate the reality, so it begins to shift. Willoughby looked impressed. I want this program expanded. After Leyte, we'll be taking thousands more prisoners. If even a fraction can be turned this effectively, it could significantly reduce casualties in the final campaigns. Yes, sir. Though I should clarify, we're not turning them in the traditional sense. We're simply helping them reconcile propaganda with reality. Whatever you call it, Captain, it works, Willoughby replied. And in war, results are what matter. As 1944 drew to a close, the Specialized Interrogation Unit on Tinian had processed over 300 Japanese prisoners, extracting intelligence that contributed to operations across the Pacific Theater. Yet beyond the tactical value, something more profound was occurring: the creation of a cadre of Japanese officers whose perspective on the war and on America had been fundamentally transformed. For Hiroshi Tanaka, this transformation culminated in a decision that would have been unthinkable months earlier. After extensive discussions with Williams, Davis, and the interrogation team, he agreed to assist with a specialized psychological operations project, the creation of surrender leaflets that would be dropped over Japanese positions on Iwo Jima and Okinawa. The wording must be precise, Tanaka explained as he reviewed draft text. This phrase here, it carries dishonorable connotations that will reinforce resistance. Instead, frame surrender as a strategic reassessment, an act that preserves strength for Japan's future rebuilding. His insights into the nuances of Japanese military psychology proved invaluable. The revised leaflets, when eventually deployed, would achieve a surrender rate nearly 3 times higher than previous versions. On a personal level, Tanaka's relationship with his former friend and now captor had evolved into something complex and unclassifiable. They were neither fully friends nor truly adversaries. Instead, they occupied a unique space created by their shared past and the harsh realities of war. What will happen after? Williams-san, Tanaka asked during one of their final sessions, when the fighting ends. Reconstruction, Williams replied. Japan will need to rebuild, physically and otherwise. Will there be punishment? For war criminals, yes. For ordinary soldiers and citizens, no. America has no desire to destroy Japan as a nation. Tanaka looked skeptical. Your government's policy may differ from the anger of your people. Pearl Harbor created much hatred, I imagine. There is anger, Williams acknowledged, but also determination to build a better peace than the one that followed the Great War. The mistakes made with Germany after 1918 taught important lessons. And people like me, prisoners who have cooperated. It was a question that revealed lingering concerns about how his actions might be perceived by fellow Japanese. You've done nothing dishonorable, Tanaka-san, Williams said firmly. You've helped save lives, Japanese and American. When the true situation becomes known to your countrymen, history will judge you differently than you fear. Tanaka nodded slowly, wanting to believe this but uncertain. My father once told me that true loyalty sometimes requires telling difficult truths to those in power. I wonder if he anticipated how complicated that philosophy would become in practice. In February 1945, as American forces prepared for the invasion of Iwo Jima, the intelligence unit on Tinian underwent reorganization. Many of the specialized interrogators, including Williams and Davis, were reassigned to forward units where their skills would support tactical operations directly. Before their departure, a final meeting was arranged between the core team and the Japanese officers who had worked most closely with them. Captain Harrison addressed the group in the mess hall, speaking through Lieutenant Akagi, who translated his words into Japanese. You men have provided information that will save countless lives on both sides, Harrison told the Japanese officers. While the conflict between our nations continues, you have demonstrated that understanding between individuals remains possible. Remember this when peace eventually returns. For Tanaka, the moment carried mixed emotions. His cooperation had evolved from reluctant answers to active assistance, driven by the gradual realization that Japan's military leadership had led the nation down an unwinnable path. Yet the traditional concepts of duty and loyalty remained powerful influences, creating an internal conflict that would never fully resolve. As the American officers prepared to depart, Williams sought out Tanaka for a private conversation. They met in a quiet corner of the camp, the Pacific breeze carrying the scent of salt and aviation fuel. "I've been authorized to tell you something few prisoners know," Williams said, keeping his voice low. "The war may end sooner than most expect. American scientists have developed new weapons of unprecedented power." Tanaka frowned. "More powerful bombers? Larger explosives?" "Something different. I can't say more, but when you hear about these weapons, remember this conversation. The Japanese government will face a choice: surrender or face destruction beyond anything previously imagined." Tanaka studied his former friend's face, seeing the gravity there. "You would not exaggerate such things." "No, I would not. Especially not to you." They stood in silence for a moment, two men whose lives had been intertwined by forces beyond their control. First friendship, then war, now something indefinable. "I have a request," Tanaka said finally. "When possible, would you send word to my family? Let them know I am alive, that I have been treated with dignity." "I'll do better than that," Williams replied. "After the war, I'll visit them personally if I can. Tell them everything. They would welcome you again, I think, despite everything." Williams smiled. "Japanese culture has always taken the long view of history, Tanaka-san. This war is but one painful chapter." As they parted, Tanaka bowed deeply, not the perfunctory acknowledgement of a prisoner to his captor, but the respectful gesture of one educated man to another. Williams returned the bow with equal formality, honoring the complex bond they had formed. In the months that followed, as the Pacific War reached its violent climax, the intelligence gathered on Tinian and other processing centers contributed to the Allied strategy that ultimately brought Japan to surrender. The unexpected atomic conclusion to the conflict, the new weapons Williams had obliquely referenced, rendered many planned invasions unnecessary, saving countless lives on both sides despite their terrible destructive power. For the Japanese prisoners who had worked with the specialized interrogation units, the post-war period brought unique challenges. Some, like Tanaka, would face suspicion from countrymen who had been taught that capture itself was shameful. Others would find their wartime experiences valuable in building bridges during occupation and reconstruction. On a warm spring day in 1949, nearly 4 years after Japan's surrender, Master Sergeant Marcus Williams, now a civilian professor at Howard University, walked a familiar path through a Kyoto garden. Cherry blossoms drifted on the breeze as he approached the traditional house where he had once lived as an exchange student. Professor Tanaka, now retired and noticeably aged by the hardships of war and its aftermath, sat on the Engawa veranda, grading papers. When he looked up and recognized his visitor, his weathered face broke into a wide smile. "Williams Sensei," he called, using the honorific title. "At last, you have returned to us." As they embraced, a slender figure emerged from the house, Hiroshi Tanaka, now working as a translator for the occupation authorities. The former naval officer had been repatriated in 1946, one of many prisoners whose wartime cooperation had facilitated Japan's difficult transition to peace. "My friend," Hiroshi said simply, extending his hand in the Western fashion before shifting to a traditional bow. "You kept your promise." "Some promises transcend war," Williams replied, returning both gestures. That evening, the three men sat in the professor's study, drinking green tea and sake as cherry blossom petals occasionally drifted through the open window. They spoke of reconstruction, of Japan's painful rebirth, of the complex relationship now forming between former enemies. "Many Japanese still do not understand how completely we were misled," Hiroshi said quietly. "The military education system taught us to see the world through a distorted lens. All countries present history in ways that favor their perspective," Williams observed. "The challenge is recognizing when patriotism becomes dangerous delusion." The elder Tanaka nodded sagely. "This is why cultural exchange, true exchange, not merely superficial tourism, is essential. When Marcus first came to us, I thought I would teach him about Japan. Instead, we learned from each other. Your son and I continued that education under less ideal circumstances, Williams said with a small smile. Hiroshi looked contemplative. I often think about those interrogation sessions. How surprising it was to hear perfect Japanese from American Marines, especially. He hesitated, cultural politeness warring with honesty. Especially from black Americans, Williams completed the thought. That was intentional, you know. Our commanding officers understood the psychological impact it would create. It was most effective, Hiroshi acknowledged. Imperial propaganda had created such a specific image of Americans, white, culturally ignorant, technologically advanced, but spiritually empty. To encounter Americans who not only spoke our language perfectly, but understood our literature, our philosophical traditions. It created cognitive dissonance, Williams said using the psychological term. When reality contradicts deeply held beliefs, something has to give. In my case, what gave way was the entire framework of imperial mythology, Hiroshi said with remarkable candor. Once I questioned one aspect, the entire structure became suspect. Professor Tanaka sipped his tea thoughtfully. Japan's tragedy was believing our uniqueness made us superior, rather than simply different. America's great strength is its capacity to absorb difference while maintaining core ideals. Though my country doesn't always live up to those ideals, Williams noted, especially regarding race. Yet men like you served with distinction despite this contradiction, the professor observed. Another paradox of war, it simultaneously brings out humanity's worst tendencies and its most noble qualities. As evening deepened into night, their conversation turned to the future. Hiroshi spoke of his work with occupation authorities, helping interpret not just language but cultural contexts to prevent misunderstandings. The elder Tanaka described his efforts to reform educational curricula, removing militaristic ideology while preserving cultural heritage. Williams shared news of the Specialized Intelligence Unit's legacy, how the cultural bridge approach had influenced post-war occupation policies, emphasizing respect and reconstruction rather than punishment and humiliation. General MacArthur understood something essential, Williams explained, that Japan could be transformed without being destroyed, that Japanese culture contained within it the seeds of democratic renewal if approached with respect rather than condescension. Not all occupation officials share this perspective, Hiroshi noted wryly. Some treat Japan as a laboratory for Western ideas without appreciation for our traditions. Those officials didn't spend evenings discussing basho and chikamatsu with Japanese families, Williams replied with a smile. They missed the education we received. As midnight approached, Professor Tanaka raised his sake cup in a toast. To understanding between cultures, hard-won through painful experience but enduring beyond conflict. Williams and Hiroshi raised their cups in response, completing a circle that had begun in peacetime, endured through war, and now continued in an uncertain but hopeful peace. Years later, when discussing the specialized interrogation programs of the Pacific War, military historians would note their unique contribution to both intelligence gathering and post-war reconstruction. The Black Marines, who had served as cultural and linguistic bridges, represented a little-known but significant chapter in the complex history of the conflict. For men like Marcus Williams, James Davis, and their Japanese counterparts, like Hiroshi Tanaka, the experience transcended military objectives. Their unexpected connections across enemy lines demonstrated that even in humanity's darkest hours, understanding remained possible between individuals willing to see beyond propaganda and prejudice. The Specialized Interrogation Unit's legacy extended far beyond the tactical intelligence it gathered. The insights into Japanese psychology and culture that these Black Marine linguists developed would inform occupation policies, educational reforms, and diplomatic approaches that helped transform a bitter enemy into one of America's closest allies in remarkably short time. Perhaps most importantly, their story illustrated a profound truth about warfare that transcends specific conflicts. That genuine understanding of one's adversary, their language, culture, and psychology, can be as powerful a tool as any weapon, not just for winning wars, but for building lasting peace in their aftermath. In a quiet Kyoto garden, as cherry blossoms fell like snow around three men who had experienced the war from vastly different perspectives, this truth found its most personal expression. A friendship that had survived the greatest conflict in human history, emerging scarred, but ultimately strengthened by the journey. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.